Morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to my talk. Obviously, as you can see on screen, we'll be discussing a CVSS 9.8 in national infrastructure. You'd think maybe if it's national infrastructure, we'll have stricter safeguards, better ways to solve solutions, and better remediation for critical vulnerabilities. Well, if you think that, you're thinking a bit too optimistic. So, today, I'm going to be discussing a CVSS 9.8 that I found independently as my work as an independent security researcher, and the bumpy ride I had when disclosing it and escalating it appropriately to the National Cybersecurity Centre. So, a little introduction to who I am, if this pointer will work. That's unfortunate. Technical issues. Right, so as you can see on the screen, I am a 16-year-old systems architect and security researcher. What I do is I find vulnerabilities in systems, whether that be national infrastructure or anything that is mission critical, and I also develop systems that are inherently secure. Because if we have insecure systems that are used with critical vulnerabilities, that's not something that I'm looking forward to. I also won the Rail Data Marketplace Hackathon of 2026, where I went against established commercial teams such as Assertis and teams of university students, and I won against all of them. I developed an offline ticket validation engine called Sentinel, and I'm currently working on implementing that with the Network Rail team this summer. And lastly, I am a Cisco Certified Cybersecurity Associate. I have quite a lot of certification experience in cybersecurity and quite a bit in networking too. So that's a little bit of an introduction to me. So let's talk about what's the target of this vulnerability. So as you can see, it is an educational service that provides functionality to thousands of schools and millions of students. That is a pretty big blast radius if you ask me. So, as you can see, in the privacy policy, it said that it concerns special category PII, it deals with free school meal stuff, it deals with things that students wouldn't really want leaked, and that sort of data compromised. So, as you can see the architecture on screen, we have a support page as the front end. Yes, you needed no intranet access, just a support page, and the middleware is a database middleware layer that is basically JSON RPC, where you provide a method name and it executes it on the server, a dynamic API, if you will. In the backend, it's a Microsoft SQL server. Now, that's very important, and you'll see why. Because I'm going to give you a spoiler, it's an SQL injection, but it's not the necessarily most default one. So, as you can see, I initially started my investigation by doing passive reconnaissance. What I did is I looked at the front end, I saw that there was a content database, and how could I gain access to it? Because realistically, the first vulnerability I thought of was maybe an IDOR, because obviously those are quite prominent nowadays. So as you can see, I found client available CSS metadata, which was essentially keys that were used in certain requests. They had literally coded the keys to the kingdom into CSS, and you could change those into requests because they didn't expect the client to know that information. That allowed me access to the entire content library, but that's a separate vulnerability. That's a different high one. So that's an IDOR, and that one, it made me think, if the front end is so brittle, what about the API behind it? And that is what made me discover this vulnerability. So, let's talk about the middleware layer for a moment. It's a gatekeeper, but it wasn't really acting like a gatekeeper. It was acting more like a blind relay. It had no security features, it had no method whitelist, and it had no really exterior protections. If you had access to it, you had keys to the kingdom. Now, the idea here is that, let's say you're searching something on a support page. It would do method search. Then the proxy server would execute that search function in the SQL. Now, that is a pretty bad design, but dynamic APIs aren't necessarily insecure by default. It's just the way they implemented it made it inherently insecure because there was no method whitelist. So I was thinking, well, I tried some basic SQL in here, maybe like a common SQL injection query, maybe like semicolon and then or 1 equals 1. But no, that wouldn't work. But that's because I didn't understand the infrastructure behind it. When you got into the head of how this was all working, you realize it uses an entirely different feature of SQL, something I call and is actually called system stored procedures. So, as you can see, let's say we change the search function to SP_who. That's system procedure who. That is a function in Microsoft SQL to tell you about who's running the query. Now, what you'd expect is that, let's say the gatekeeper gets this request. It will prepend exec to it. Or that's what it would do if it was insecure. It would do exec SP_who. That's not very good. But let's see if it actually does that, because, it could be that, national infrastructure is really secure and we don't have to worry about anything. Spoiler, it's not. So as you can see on screen, you can see these parameters, SPID, ECID, login name, where it revealed that it was running as a database owner. It had full privileges. It was not compartmentalized. And the database name, the host name, the request ID, I could get it back. It wasn't even blind. It was a textbook CVSS vulnerability. Now, if you think about it, that isn't necessarily the worst vulnerability because, well, obviously one account is going to be running the database. It's not going to be a lot of accounts running different queries. But the proxy executing the queries, being the database owner itself, revealed security flaws in the way this was designed. Clearly, it's been scaled up to national infrastructure in a way that they made this platform for one thing, then it's now escalated to this big thing, and they haven't had the time to remake it and make it production worthy. Now, but how do we get from here? We found out the database owner, but I said we have an SQL injection flaw. Am I lying? Probably not. So how do we get from knowing the database owner to arbitrary SQL execution? Now that is what this payload in the top right does. As you can see, we have the method name, which is SP_SQL_exec. It's made so that you can run templated SQL statements parameterized on the Microsoft SQL server. It almost acts like another execution context. And that is pretty dangerous. So instead of doing SP_who, we're now doing SP_SQL_exec, SP_SQL execution. But our params say P1. Select cast username as integer. Those who are probably SQL wizards in the room probably know username returns a string. You can't really cast a string to an integer. It's kind of the point. So what do you guys think happens when we send that to the server? So what happens is this. Conversion failed when converting the nvarchar value admin to data type integer. I think that reveals something personally. I think that reveals that username is admin. It once again reveals that this is running as a database owner. And for some clarity, these symbols have been all anonymized. It wasn't literally called admin. But if I told you what it's called, I'd be breaking my responsible disclosure privileges. So what happens when we have SQL injection, where we could arbitrarily execute any SQL command that we want? And what's really the point of all of this? Maybe it's compartmentalized. Maybe it's not got data. Maybe there's a reason. Maybe it's a honeypot. Who knows? Well, I do. This is what was in the database. This is what I can tell you was in the database. So, as you can see here, we've got financial records, bank statements, credit notes, invoices, users, user security table. I mean, that being in the same database itself suggests a pretty bad segmentation issue. Holidays requests, days off, remote commands, command generator servers, and a schools table, amongst many others that I can't show. Now, how did I get this information? Fully responsibly, I just changed SP_who to SP tables, because that's also another system stored procedure to list the names of tables that the user has access to. But realistically, how could we expect that a critical national infrastructure, part of education, would have a vulnerability in it that allows access to these tables? Maybe they're empty, maybe they are. But I had to prove CIA impact. Was this enough? Maybe. But it turns out, obviously, it wasn't just a content database. It had completely unsegmented monolith, financial records, academic records, RCE potential, and that's before we even talk about XP command shell. I mean, we have two vectors for remote code execution, where we can change the scope from just database execution to execution on the server. And is that enough for CVSS 10? Is that enough for scope unchanged? Maybe. And that's why in the slide it says CVSS 9.8, but in the title it says 10. But if a ransomware group had found these vulnerabilities before I did, they wouldn't have even dumped these tables. They would have went straight for the RCE. They would have went straight for XP command shell, dumped a command and control server onto the execution context, and they would exfiltrate it in less than 60 seconds. Just because of one API that was left entirely unprotected, no method whitelists, and nothing protecting it from the outside world. And the idea is that a WAF wouldn't have helped against this because this was intended behavior. It was made to execute these system store procedures, but because the developer thought, well, the client can be trusted, the client can only give these certain procedures anyway when we do these API calls. Because they didn't embody a zero trust model, they ended up discovering that it turns out the client can't be trusted, and you should probably validate it on the server too. Well, that is a pretty big revelation, as you say. So, what did I do with it? What I did is I disclosed it to the vendor. So I called them lots of times because they didn't have a vulnerability disclosure policy. They also didn't have any place where you can report vulnerabilities. They had no security email, no security well-known, nothing. They had Cyber Essentials Cluster, that was nice. But they did have, they didn't really have any security features whatsoever. So I had to go through the conventional way, the help desk. And that wasn't a very nice experience. I couldn't phone them up on December 4th. I get hold of the team lead after 5 days. I think that's a pretty long time frame, if you ask me. They call me, and I give them the decryption password for the encrypted VDR. So I open up my laptop, and I've just gave them the password, and they've said to me, "Oh, well, you're a student at this school, aren't you? This stringents our relationship with that school. What you did broke the terms of use." And I was like, "No, it doesn't. I don't have an account." "Yeah, it does. It does break the terms of use." I wasn't going to fight that battle, so we just hung up, and hopefully he received a report. He did. And then it fixed. No, it didn't. What it did, actually, was I called him back a month later. He told me, "Oh, it's low severity. Although you could gain access to one element, your analysis was incorrect." And, maybe, just maybe, we can trust him. Maybe it's low priority. Maybe the SQL execution on thousands of students' data is just low priority for them. Obviously, I would disagree, but maybe it's just their opinion. People have freedom of speech nowadays. But I check it 4 months later. It's still not fixed. It still wasn't fixed. So I had to go up the food chain. I had to talk to GC3, the UK's government's Cyber Coordination Centre. Now, this was a long pathway. I started this in December 2025. I found this vulnerability in December. I reported it also within the 24 hours of me discovering it. I transmitted the VDR within 5 days because the team lead wouldn't contact me. I reported it to the UK Government Cyber Coordination Centre on January 6th, I think. What happened next was they had internal discussions about whether they should be able to actually look at this or not, because it's not a government asset, and all of these jurisdictional boundaries. They tell me, "Well, it looks like they're cooperating with you, and wait 90 days. Not their fault. It's a jurisdictional boundary at the end of the day. Can't exactly violate that very easily, especially when like they might actually fix it. So I check again because I'd already submitted my CFP for BSides thinking this would be fixed. So I was almost on a bit of a shaky ground. Can't exactly present an active exploit chain. I mean, I don't think any of you would if you were speaking and turns out the vulnerability you're reporting doesn't actually get fixed. Can't exactly alert the public of this. So I emailed GC3 about a week or two ago and reported through the NCSC vulnerability disclosure program. What happens is they have another internal discussion. They told me to come back after 90 days, and I did. They asked me for the transcripts of my communications with this vendor. They asked me, why do you think this is critical when they say it's low priority? I give them all the payloads I used, the 3 that I meticulously chosen. SP-who, to demonstrate unparameterized system store procedure execution. SP-tables, to understand the data that's being held in this database. And SP-SQL-exec, to determine the parameterized, to demonstrate the capability of parameterized system store procedure execution. Meticulously chosen, because if I had picked any other, I'm pretty sure I would be arrested right now. So it's pretty good that I picked those 3 and didn't listen to the AI that told me to contact my superior. I don't think I have one. So that is my time with the GC3. They told me, again, in about April, when I had reported it again to them, for the transcripts, I gave it them. I sent them recordings of the calls that I had with this vendor. Thank God I recorded them. They wouldn't believe me otherwise. And eventually, GC3 asked the vendor, hey guys, you should probably fix this. Now, the vendor thanks me, which is nice, and they fixed it just about a week ago. GC3 said I was an exemplar of vulnerability disclosure, which is nice. So that is my experience with GC3. They're very nice, and special thanks to them, because they overrode their own jurisdictional boundaries of this must be His Majesty's government asset, and helped 3 million kids not get exposed by a data breach. I mean, if any of you were in the previous talk, like just now, it would be pretty bad if they leaked 3 million kids as special category PII on the internet. And with just one of the tables that I mentioned, you could do just that. And they fixed it now, which is nice. I also reported 3 other vulnerabilities to that vendor. Not sure if they've been fixed. But it is what it is. That is the prophecy of responsible disclosure. So what you almost have to consider is, I kind of want to talk about the human element of it all, because it is the hardest part of this vulnerability. Overall, what I could have done is abused it. I could have just had a look at one of the tables. I could have, oh, maybe I'm 16. I'm immature. Maybe I want to change some grades. I could have. Did I? No, because I know what it would do. I know that there's no benefit in abusing a vulnerability like this rather than protecting the individuals at hand. And I also had a slightly more respectable option. What I could have done when the vendor told me I was wrong, harassed me saying that they're going to contact my school, said that my rider analysis was incorrect, and it was low priority. I could have done what many security researchers do and put it on the internet. Did I? No. I was strictly silent, because that is what separates a threat actor and a security researcher. If you find a vulnerability in a service and it has the impact of potentially impacting millions of individuals, sure, you might be able to force a patch very quickly if you put something on the internet. But you're also putting millions of people at risk by doing so. You're painting the backs of millions of students who will not thank you for what you did. They will hate you for what you did. That is not responsible disclosure. And I will vehemently argue against anyone who says that is, because it's not. You always have a way out. Technically, GC3 isn't meant to have dealt with this. They're technically only meant to deal with His Majesty's government. But because I was so adamant in getting this fixed, it got fixed without me having to leak a single byte of data. So, what lessons do we learn from this? The technical lessons here are very simple. Segment your databases. Make sure you've not just got one server containing all of your data, because if one gets attacked by an unaccounted for 0 day, you don't want that to be a horrible day. What you do want, however, is data to be separated and compartmentalized to the extent where necessary. You shouldn't have users table, user security in the same database if one of them may contain hashes. You also don't want financial data and corporate data to be in the same database as academic data, because sure, it might be easy to program that way, but is it secure that way? Probably not. Especially given the fact that one single vulnerability, one single oversight in one single endpoint gave me total access to this entire company's data, the holiday request for all of the employees. You wouldn't want that being leaked. But if you think about it, there are more important lessons here. The lessons, the lessons here is that when vendors become hostile, when things don't go as planned, forced to machine truth, you know the impact of your vulnerability. You know what it may cause, the impact that it may have. Do you want your reputation to be the guy that leaked it? Or do you want your reputation to be the guy that managed to solve it and help protect millions of students? That is responsible disclosure. That is the correct handling of a vulnerability. And realistically, if you let it long enough, the authorities will take it. They will take good care of your vulnerability if you present it in the right way. If you say that it's critical, if you prove that it's critical, it's going to be handled as critical. So what you should do from step 1 to step 5 is reconnaissance, identify an exploit, make a proof of concept, follow responsible disclosure by only using certain methods, and do not, under any circumstance, extract a single row of data from those tables, because then they will sue you into oblivion. Step 4, contact the vendor. If the vendor is hostile, that's okay. Try and negotiate with them as much as you can. Sure, it may be low priority. Sure, they may say you're wrong. Get them to fix it anyway. Your ego does not matter more than a vulnerability. Sure, they might tell you, oh, well, technically this. Okay, are you going to fix it? If the answer to that's no, that's when you take it a step further and you say, okay, then I'm going to have to tell GC3 about this. I'm going to have to tell ICO about this, or so forth. There is real impact here for these individuals. And if you believe in the work that you do, you're not going to have a problem with doing that. That's the 5-step process of responsible disclosure. And that's where I'm kind of thankful for the NCSC labeling me an exemplar of responsible disclosure. Sure, I had to wait 5 months, but at the end of the day, those 5 months are a very short time compared to the lifelong impact that data would have on those people. Because I could have went up and posted it on Twitter. Did I? No. Did I post it on breach forums? Absolutely not. Because, sure, might get me a few internet brownie points, but will it save these people? No. You have to think of the bigger picture here. And what I almost want you to think about is, as security researchers, we maintain our own operational security. We maintain OPSEC. We maintain responsible disclosure. We abide by NDAs. So if people deserve to have their data be confidential, why would we ever post something like this on Twitter? I think all of you have heard about the Microsoft researcher who's been posting 0 days now because they're not being treated correctly. I don't really agree with that, because you're putting people at risk. You're putting infrastructure at risk by releasing vulnerabilities because your infrastructure might not have been treated correctly. So what I almost want you to think about when we get to the end of this presentation is the following. When things go wrong, there will always be a way out, whether that be the way that you think is going to happen with, I thought the vendor was going to tell me, oh, great, we're going to fix it, guys. I thought maybe after a few months they'd still fix it. Think optimistically. If there still isn't a way, make one. Because there will always be whether that be a steel path or one that you've makeshifted yourself, it will still lead to the same outcome. And that is the anatomy of a CVSS 9.8 in critical national infrastructure. Thank you for your time.